We use geoelectrics for inferring moisture distribution within the stone. So we want to know which areas are wet and which are dry. And to test this technique, we've constructed a test wall at Wytham Woods, which is just outside Oxford. The principle behind the technique is based on calculating resistivity. In essence, that's how easily electric current can move through, in this case, the stone. The first step in the process is to set up a survey line or transect. We place electrodes along that line and then pass current into those electrodes, and that's what enables us to find out what's going on within the wall. Most of the electrodes are a self-adhesive pad. On the front face, there's a metal attachment which we connect our electrodes to, and on the reverse, in the centre, underneath that metal connector, is a little blob of conducting jelly. That's where the electricity passes through the metal connector and into the wall. And to fix it on the wall, you literally just place it at the right position and then push on to make sure it's stuck and it's got a good contact with the stone surface. The spacing of the electrodes determines the resolution of the study. So the closer they are, the higher the resolution, the smaller features that you can see in the stone. But another important consideration is the overall length of the transect as well, because the depth that you see into the stone is a function of the transect length. We put 40 electrodes on this particular transect. There's no magic in the number, it's just usually you put as many as you can on to get the deepest penetration into the stone. So we can usually see at 4 centimetre spacing, perhaps 30 centimetres or a foot into the stone. And the next stage after that is to actually connect the electrode cables to the electrodes on the wall. It's critical that the right cable is connected to the right electrode. All the cables are numbered. We number the electrodes as well to make sure that there are no errors in that particular procedure. What we're trying to do is infer the distribution of moisture within the stone, and we do this through a property called resistivity. And generally speaking, if the stone is wetter, the current will flow more easily, so the resistivity will be lower. Conversely, if the resistivity is high, then the stone's probably quite dry. We're interested in knowing about the distribution of moisture in stone because it has a very big impact on the conservation of that stone. If there's moisture present, for example, in the winter and it freezes, it can form frost and ice and it will degrade the stone. For this particular project, the moisture level is also very important for algae, because the algae like conditions which are generally quite moist. So it's quite important for us to know how the moisture is distributed both across the surface of the stone and within the stone as well. The next stage is to connect the electrodes on the wall to the geotom device, and we do that using these heavy shielded cables here. The geotom is controlled by a laptop computer basically. We can work out resistivity if we know what the current and the voltage is. So what the geotom device does is it applies a voltage, because we know the voltage and we know the current, and that allows the computer to calculate what the resistivity is going to be. This represents the surface of the stone across the top, and as you go down the section that's going into the stone. The top electrode, electrode 1, is on the left-hand side, and the bottom electrode, electrode 40, is on the right-hand side. What this section is showing us is that the surface of the stone is generally pretty dry. Towards the base it gets much damper, and then this intermediate zone just below the surface which is quite moist. But you see right deep in the stone it actually appears to be very dry, which is kind of what you'd expect. Having carried out the survey, we have the raw data that we need to tell us about the moisture in the stone. But this is only a very approximate idea from this initial survey. So what we need to do is take the data back to the lab and process it on the computer so we can get a geometrically accurate view of what's going on within the stone. The raw data that we collect in the field gives us a broad idea of where the moisture is. So what we need to do is we need to transform that data, process it using an inversion program, and that gives us real dimensions. The raw data we collect in the field is also slightly distorted, so features don't have their true shape, and the inversion software will deal with that as well. And the pattern that we can see is that the surface has these hot colours, these reds, oranges and yellows that indicate high resistivity, so that's quite dry. If we go into the wall at an intermediate depth, we see these blues and greens. That's lower resistivity, so that's probably quite moist in that zone. Also towards the bottom of the wall, we can see it appears to be lower resistivity and therefore moister than at the top of the wall. And at depth, we get this big block of red and orange, which is very high resistivity, which indicates the wall is very dry at a depth of around about 30 centimetres. The advantage of the inversion program is it gives us very high resolution data, so we can be very specific about precisely where the moisture is. That's very important for the kind of work that we do.